Today on Practical Church Planting, we talk about 3 misconceptions many people have when planting a church.
Welcome everybody to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement to help you plant and grow healthy churches.
Yes.
My name is Brian Adrosian. That guy, his name is Dylan Dodson. And today we're talking about 3 church planting misconceptions.
So there's definitely a lot more than 3 misconceptions that many of us have going into church planting. But
Definitely.
I feel like we'll talk about 3 ones that I hear a lot, maybe ones that you've thought or said. And so, so whether you're in the journey, whether you're at the start of the journey, we'll let you know that these things are not what you think they are.
Yes.
So here we go. Not in any particular order. Number one is kind of also like a pet peeve of mine. But this misconception that I'm going to plant a church so unique and so different than any other church in the community that everyone's just going to want to come.
Yeah.
Now, there's a couple of things that don't work out quite that way. And one of the reasons why I'm really not a fan of that, because you'll hear people say, we're the only Bible teaching church, or we're the only life-giving church, or we're the only church that does X, Y, or Z, is that A, you don't know that.
Yeah.
And so many times I see people post on social media, whatever, they're planning a church, they're doing this thing, that we're the only church like this in the area. And it's like, unless you've gone on and talked to every single pastor in church, like you don't know that. And to me, I'm not a fan of that too, because it also leads your people to kind of say the same things.
Yep.
Kind of like, well, we go to this church because it's the best church at doing blank. And to me, even if it were to be true, it doesn't bring unity at all. It kind of says, hey, we're the best and we're better than you. And we don't want people to think that, because it's not true.
Yeah, I think it kind of feeds into the church competition,
Right.
mindset, where it's my church is better than your church because of this reason.
Right.
When in reality, it's a win if someone's going to a church,
Yes.
not necessarily just yours.
And the thing is too, you might be like, well, I'm in a small town and I actually do know for a
Right.
fact that there's like no churches here that do this or thing. And that's true. But instead of saying like, we're the only one that does this, just emphasize that you do it. But the whole exclusive claim, to me, it comes across as very better than, which is not what we want to do. It also sets up your people to kind of think that their church is the best, which is not what we want to do. And you just don't know that to be true. And the reality of the situation is, if you planted a church and you've staked your claim on being the only church that does X, that's not the reason why people come.
Yeah. Unless
it's like a super church person, and that type of church person you're reaching out after, like a lot of new people, it doesn't mean anything to them anyway. And so, especially if they don't know Jesus. And so you can get frustrated. Like, I thought we were the only church that does this, and why aren't people coming? Because people come for a lot of reasons that have to do with other things beyond just being the only church that does X, Y, or Z in your community.
Yeah.
And so again, you can emphasize certain things, and that's great, but just thinking that if we do this differently than all the other churches, then other people will come, that's not what makes people come. A lot of times it's a combination of things, whether they felt welcome, relationships, can they get involved? There's a multitude of things, and if you stake your claim on, we're the only one that does this as the main reason for people to come to your church, again, like we said, I don't think it really gives a lot of unity and love to other churches. And I think you'll find that that's not going to be the reason why most people come, unless it's like a very specific type. I don't want to give an example because I don't want to offend anybody. A very specific type of church person.
Sure.
But we plant churches, yes, for Christians, but also to reach non-Christians. And so if you make it all about some Christian thing or some Christianese word, you can't expect you to reach more people, because non-Christians don't even know anything about that.
Yeah, and like you're saying, unless you're in like some extremely rural area where you know literally all the other churches, odds are there are great churches in your area, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to go out and saying we're number one or we're the best at this or this.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of great churches in the area, and there needs to be, no matter what. Even if you literally are the best church at whatever thing, you're not going to reach everybody in the area. So,
again,
it's a good thing.
Not saying you can't focus on something that's great, but don't go out and say we're the best one, because it sows disunity and it doesn't even attract non-Christians that we're trying to reach. So that's number one, thinking if I'm unique, everybody will come. Number two, again, not in any particular order, especially if you're a pastor, lead planter, you probably thought this, I think we've all thought this, that growth is 100% tied to my preaching ability.
Right.
So the better communicator I am, the better expositor of God's word, the funnier I am, that is what will drive the church. And if I'm a great communicator, people will come. And if I stink, people will not come.
Right.
The reality of the situation is, while communicating is important, and we've seen it in New City, we've talked about it in previous eprobably that oftentimes it's not preaching that brings a first-time guest back. Now, preaching might keep someone there because you probably don't want to be bored. Right. But a lot of times when someone's new, it's not the preaching that brings them back. It's were they welcome? Did they feel loved? Did they have a good experience? There's a lot of things that have nothing to do. Most people decide if they're coming back before the service even starts.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to do with your preaching. And I think this maybe should take the weight off your shoulders a bit, thinking, hey, I'm doing a great job. Why aren't we growing? I don't understand. Or thinking, I'm doing a terrible job. Why aren't we growing? It must be because I'm terrible. There's a lot of other factors at play than your preaching ability.
Yeah, a few, I don't know when it was, a handful of months ago or a year ago or something like that, we did a video here at New City asking people kind of what their favorite things about the church was. It was for this thing that we put together. And obviously no offense to Dylan because he's the lead pastor here, but very few, if any, were saying that their very favorite thing was the preaching. And it wasn't because they disliked it, but it's because there are things like community and relationships that they built, which are the reasons that they came back. Yeah. So yeah, I agree. Tying it, kind of having it all on your shoulders like that, I think does more harm than good.
And here's the hard thing is you're like, well, a lot of the big churches I know of have great communicators.
Sure, yeah,
this is true. I would probably say the larger the church gets, the more the communicating probably does determine a little bit more if people come back or not. Mm-hmm. But if you're a church plant you're not in that situation at all. Yep. And even if you think about it, these churches that do have excellent communicators, if you've been to some of their churches, they probably also have a lot of people who serve. They probably have a clean facility. Yeah. They probably do a good job of welcoming you. There's so many other things beyond just the preaching that brings people back. Now, good communicating will help people stick. It's definitely important. But we think if I'm a great preacher, people will come. And then the downside of that too is all you do is, let's say you spend 4 days a week working on your sermon, and then you wonder why people don't stick. But it's because you haven't spent any time making sure your environment is welcoming, or you're doing things in the community that makes a difference, or maybe if you have small groups or community groups or whatever. Like, there's a lot that goes into a church besides just what happens on Sunday. And so if you put all your efforts on Sunday and you're wondering why people don't come, people don't stick, why new people aren't coming, it's because there's so much more to growing a church and reaching more people than just the preaching. Now, preaching is very important, and you do want to get as good as you can, but it should take the weight off a little bit if you're always beating yourself up. But it also should remind you, also, if you think you're great and you're like, why am I not growing? And you may be a great communicator, there might be some other things that need some attention that are prohibiting your church from reaching more people.
Yeah, and I mean, if we look biblically, being a pastor in a biblical sense is more than just preaching as well. So there's other things that need to be spending time on than just making sure you're a great communicator.
So again, number 2, we think that growth is all about preaching, which is not true. Number 3, here's the third one, is that it gets easier. And I heard people, when we started launching New City Church, there were a few years down the road, say the same thing. And I was like, I don't really know about that. Yeah. And now that we're a year and a half into it, I would say, when I say we think it gets easier, I would say to some degree the answer is yes. And what I mean by yes is that when you're just launching and you're not sure the church is going to make it, is anyone going to show up, or we're going to have to close the doors, that is a unique type of stress that is different than once you're a little bit more established. That being said, the financial stress never does go away because as your church grows, you have more needs and things you have to do. And so generally speaking, I would say, and I think a lot of people that have planted a church at least a few years in or longer would say it doesn't get any easier. And so when you think, oh, this is a hard season, but in 6 months it's going to be okay, you're really setting yourself up for failure, because in 6 months there's still going to be things that you're stressed out about and things that are difficult. I was telling Brian before we started, I like to think of, here at New City, there's 3 or 4 people on staff other than myself. We're a year and a half in. The guys have been on staff almost since the beginning, raised your own support. And so when we talk to church planners, like, talking to me, they're like, oh, that must be so great that you have all this help. Yeah. And the answer is absolutely it is. But I kind of like to think of it as in a business sense. So like a small business owner, if they're successful, they start making money, they have 1 or 2 options. They can keep the business the size that they are, take a good paycheck, and that's it. Or if they want to keep growing the business, as they take in more money, instead of taking a paycheck in, they redistribute their assets and resources to make the business grow. Sure. So the business could be quite a big business, and let's say the owner still doesn't make a lot of money. Why? Because they're recalibrating, or whatever the word is, their assets. Yeah. And so for us, like even for me, I would tell people, if you're by yourself and you're doing all these things, it would be very nice if you had people that could take things off your plate. But at New City, I'm not just sitting around and being like, oh, well, I'm just going to spend all this time hanging out and doing this and that or whatever. Yeah. Instead, I'm redistributing my time to other things so that New City can grow and reach more people. Sure. And I just think that it's a huge misconception when you start out and be like, this is the only hard part. This is the only part that's going to be difficult. It doesn't get easier, it changes. Yeah. And so we just need to be prepared to understand that this is not the easiest thing in the world to do.
That's going to be the case in any organization. Right. I mean, there's going to be seasons that things are more difficult, and then once that difficult thing passes, the new difficult thing comes up, and that's just a life cycle of a business. That's what it is.
And part of this too is learning if you're a leader in ministry to trust God, because there's always going to be financial stressors, no matter how big you are. There's always going to be people that need help. There's always going to be things that break on Sunday morning. That's always going to be the case. And so I think part of the sanctification part of planting a church and being in ministry is learning to trust God in the midst of knowing you're never going to be where you want to be.
Yeah, and when you're pastoring a church, you're dealing with people, and I don't think that's ever going to be an easy, quote unquote, easy thing. And so just kind of always waiting for it to get easier and easier, I think you're going to set yourself up to have a pretty tough life.
Right. So again, here are the 3 common misconceptions that a lot of people have going into church planting. 1, if I plant a church that's unique from everyone else, all these new people will just show up.
Right.
2, growth is all about preaching. If I'm a great communicator, everyone will come. If I stink, nobody will come. And number 3, that it will get easier after a certain amount of time. It doesn't get easier. It just gets different.
Right.
So thanks for listening today. If you have questions, you can always go to practicalplanting.com/questions so we can talk about it in a future episode. And if you find Practical Church Planting helpful in any way, we'd love for you to share it.
Yep.
Share away, and let's help plant more healthy, growing churches together. That sounds like a great thing.
Let's do it together.
See you next time on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planting. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planting, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planting on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.